Chapters 5 and 6 of the Gospel of Mark are so well designed. They are all about the coming of the kingdom of God in dramatic ways that impel us as an audience to action, that impelled Jesus' first audience in first century Judea to action, to make a decision. Who is this Jesus guy? What is this kingdom all about? It's so well designed. It's amazing. So first, open up your Bibles, look to the end of chapter 4. You are going to love this. At the end of chapter 4, this is a big old frame narrative like we talked about in the last video. This is a way that Mark has organized the narrative logic to help us pull bits and pieces together to see a tapestry of meaning in a really neat way. And so at the end of chapter 4, what we see is a scene where Jesus is in the middle of a storm with his disciples. And this is quite the scene. That's going to be chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. We'll talk about it a little bit, but flip quickly to chapter 6, Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 52. You will find another stormy Sea of Galilee scene with the disciples and Jesus. There are two echoes here that are very intentional. Every scene in between those two ends of the frame narrative are all about the kingdom come through Jesus. And so what we are seeing now is a claim being made that Jesus is king. Jesus is doing all of these actions that echo Yahweh from the Old Testament to really show that God has come in a new way to sort things out, to establish a new community of faith that will be able to get at the heart of the matter, to follow in covenant relationship with Yahweh in a true and good way. That's what this section's all about. So first, what Jesus does as he conquers this crazy enemy, a legion of demons at the beginning of chapter 5, which of course echoes the way in which Yahweh conquers the enemies of Israel. Scenes like 2 Kings chapter 6 come to mind when there's an army attacking and wanting to capture Elisha, and the servant of Elisha says, "What are we going to do? There's a giant army. There's no help for us. They outnumber us 10-1. It's no good." And Elisha's sitting there calmly and sort of just says, "Oh, Lord, open the young man's eyes." And the Lord opens the young man's eyes, and there's this holy host of angels in his army that scares away and captures the enemy army, and has this supernatural way of conquering the enemies that they could not conquer. Scenes like that are being echoed here. Jesus is conquering this legion of demons. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Right after that, Jesus goes and he restores women to health and to community. He raises the dead. Again, this is all echoes from stories like Elijah and Elisha. And then he goes back to his hometown in Nazareth. And Jesus is rejected by the people in his hometown, just like Yahweh was rejected by Israel time and time again, places like 1 Samuel 8. We'll talk about that again as well. And then right on the heel of him being rejected is this strange story. It's a flashback of King Herod and John the Baptist. And it feels like, why the goodness gracious is that in here? That must be some sort of mistake, like Mark kind of forgot to tell us that earlier and is like, oh yeah, oops, I'll just put this in real quick because it's probably important. We find that it's very intentional. It's really cool. And then after that, he feeds people in the wilderness. 5,000 people follow him out into the wilderness, and he feeds them with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He feeds everyone, and they are satisfied. And just like that, Yahweh in the Old Testament in Exodus feeds his people with manna from heaven in a supernatural way, and they all eat and are satisfied. They are taken care of by Yahweh. So again and again, the whole way throughout this frame narrative, there are scenes where Jesus is doing things just like Yahweh, by the power of Yahweh, by the power of the Holy Spirit. Front and center is this claim, okay, this kingdom thing is from God. This Jesus guy is from God, is participating with the community of faith just like Yahweh, but here in our midst, and this is going to change everything. That's what chapters 5 and 6 are all about, in between these two boat scene narratives in the stormy seas. And so, end of chapter 4, we get Jesus sleeping on a cushion in the middle of a storm, very much like Jonah. And he eventually is roused awake by the disciples who are very scared. They're losing it. They say, hey, why aren't you doing anything? They trust that he can do something. And so he goes ahead and he says, to the winds and the waves, he says, shut up, calm down, it's all right. And this is right from Psalm 107, verse 29, where Yahweh has the power to speak and still the forces of nature. And so it is a proclamation that this Jesus guy is something different, something divine. Chapter 5, he is crossing over to the region of the Gerasenes. Other Gospels might say Gadarenes. And the geography is incredibly important in Mark. This is not Judean territory. This is Gentile territory on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. These are not people who worship at the temple typically. These are not people who typically follow Yahweh. They are people who do not follow the law of the Torah. They eat unclean animals like pigs. And he is over there now. He is in that territory. And he is met by a strange man with an unclean spirit. But here's what we learn about him. We learn that this strange man was living among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him in chains any longer. He had been bound in shackles and chains, but he broke all of the bindings, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. That's the kind of language we read in here. Now, when was the last time we heard about a strong man that only Jesus could bind? Flashback to Mark chapter 3, the way that Jesus described his mission, the binding of the strong man. This is another echo of that. But here we hear that it's not just one unclean spirit that's inside this man. He says, we are many. My name is Legion, for we are many. And Jesus doesn't seem to have a problem with taking on a legion of demons. Now, what you should know is that the word legion is used very intentionally here. This was occupied by Rome, especially when Mark was writing to his audience a couple of decades after Jesus. There was trouble brewing in the first Jewish revolt, and things were getting violent, intense, and people were forced to decide, are you going to be on the side of Rome? Are you going to be a good citizen? Or are you going to join the violent revolt trying to overthrow the oppressive Roman forces? And amidst that political climate, Mark is writing that maybe there's a third way. Maybe trusting Jesus to fight our battles for us will give us a different kind of option. And so Jesus here is fighting Legion, the Roman legion, full of unclean spirits. And again, we see Mark saying, you think Rome is the bad guy, but there's really one bad guy, the evil spirit of Satan, who animates all of these people who oppose you, like Rome, like Pharisees, whoever it might be. Humans are not the bad guys. Humans are being duped by these forces of evil. And so again, we don't see Jesus facing a Roman legion. We see Jesus facing a legion of evil spirits, the true enemy. And he casts them out, and he casts them out into 2,000 pigs. No random herder on a Gerasene countryside has 2,000 pigs, unless you are trying to feed an army, like an encamped Roman legion, like the 10th Legion that was stationed there in the 60s during the first Jewish revolt. You would need 2,000 pigs to feed that army. And so the hardest part about having a mobilized unit of military like a legion is feeding them. So Jesus takes out a legion of demons by taking out the food source of the Roman legion, thus meaning that they are essentially crippled and can't go anywhere. Jesus can fight battles and bind the strong man in ways that we cannot. That is a big, hey, this is Yahweh saving you kind of moment. So the pig herders, they get scared, and they find that this crazy man who couldn't be bound is subdued. He's sitting, clothed in his right mind. He's able to participate in community again, which is what the healing of God brings about. It's always oriented towards flourishing community. So he's able to be a part of society again. And so he goes back and he preaches. This is an interesting commentary on the silencing motif to note. Jesus actually doesn't say, hey, don't tell anyone about what I did for you, like he does elsewhere. He says, no, go and preach. Go back to your hometown and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. And then he goes and he does what the Lord commanded. And then here we go, verse 21 of chapter 5. Jesus crosses the lake again. Follow your geography. Jesus crosses the lake again back into Judean territory. As soon as he gets out of the boat, a synagogue leader, a prominent man, Jairus, he comes and his daughter is sick. It's a life and death situation. This scene is another Markan sandwich, intercalation. We start with the scene of Jairus and his daughter. We get interrupted by a story about a bleeding woman who came to Jesus for healing. And then we finish with Jairus and his daughter. So Jairus comes. He's a prominent man in the community, someone that has influence. And his 12-year-old daughter needs healing. So Jesus says, sure, I'll come and I'll heal your daughter. And then he gets interrupted by a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, some sort of hemorrhagic condition that we're not really familiar with. So she comes and she kneels before Jesus, just the same way that Jairus kneeled before Jesus, just the same way that the Gerasene Demoniac kneeled before Jesus. And she's desperate. She has tried all the right things. She went to all the doctors and spent all of her money on medical bills, and nothing worked. She did all the right things, and now she's poor, and she's in a state where she wouldn't be able to participate in community because she was viewed as unclean due to her condition. And now she was poor on top of it because of spending all of her money on medical bills. And being poor has a way of separating you from community as well, back then as well as now. And so Jesus is interrupted, and he lets himself get interrupted, which is totally unethical. There was a dying child waiting for him. That's what he should have done. A prominent man and a dying child, he should have kept going and ignored this interruption. But Jesus stopped, and he had this moment where he was able to talk with this woman. Go, your faith has healed you. Your trust has healed you. And then he continues on to the daughter who has since died. And Mark adds a throwaway detail after he raises this girl from the dead. He adds at the end that she's 12 years old. That's interesting. Why would Mark add that? She's 12 years old. The woman was bleeding for 12 years. There are 12 disciples, the new startup of Israel. There are 12 tribes of Israel. This is one of those interesting ways that I think Mark is nodding, okay, if 12 is the number of the community of God, maybe these two women, the girl and the woman, are part of that community as well. So again, Yahweh restores community, he heals. This is another way Jesus is saying, I am here on behalf of Yahweh. We get him coming to his hometown, and he's rejected, just like 1 Samuel 8. And the people who grew up with him, who knew him from when he was a wee lad, they wouldn't let him be who he is now. He had done amazing things that are beyond their understanding, and it's just hard for them to reconcile, hey, the guy we grew up with is doing this now. It just doesn't add up. So he says the classic triple negative. A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown. And so he is rejected by his own people, just like Yahweh is. With all of that, then we get to a strange flashback to King Herod. It's this weird scene. He's got this opulent party with these aristocrats. And what we see here is Jesus was just rejected by his hometown. Yahweh was supposed to be king over Israel. In 1 Samuel 8, Yahweh says, okay, they've rejected me. They haven't rejected you, Samuel, when Samuel gets mad at them. Yahweh is supposed to be king. Then we get a smash cut into the scene of King Herod. And King Herod is having this opulent party, and he is elbowed into this sticky situation where he doesn't want to disappoint his illegitimate wife, and he doesn't want to disappoint his daughter, and he doesn't want to disappoint his aristocrat friends. And so he does something he doesn't want to do, and he kills John the Baptist. He beheads him in this really violent way. And there's a big banner now that says, okay, King Herod is not actually a powerful person. He is subject to the influences and the whims of the people around him. Can we trust him as king? No. Again, Mark is saying, okay, if your alternative to Jesus as king is King Herod, think again. This guy is not going to accurately represent Yahweh the way that Jesus is. Again and again, each one of these scenes does that. We conclude this framing narrative with feeding 5,000 in the wilderness, just like manna for the Israelites in the Exodus. And again, Mark is putting two narratives side by side so that we can interpret one another. King Herod has this opulent party of aristocrats, and they're reclining and eating and drinking and having fun. And then Jesus is out in the wilderness with your everyday working class from anywhere who, they came from everywhere. All different kinds of people are coming to Jesus, and they're reclining in the grass. It is like this mirror image of the party that Herod just had. So Jesus recognizes that they're hungry because they were so dedicated in such a rush that they didn't even pack dinner. And so he sits them down in symposium by symposium, dinner party by dinner party. This is a nod to Greek culture where you would have dinner parties of influence, and again, kind of jabbing at the aristocrats where, okay, they get to have Jesus. You think these unwashed masses of lowly people, they don't get to have dinner parties, but here they get to have a dinner party with Jesus. That's cool. But also, they're sat down in groups of 100 and in groups of 50s. Why would Mark tell us that? We saw at the beginning of chapter 5, Jesus has the power to destroy enemy armies. 150s, that's how you organize a military unit into the cohorts and into divisions. So they're sitting down in 150s. There's 5,000 men. That is a legion of men. So Jesus is able to destroy enemy legions. He's able to build his own legions, and he's able to feed his own legions. Again, the hardest part about having a mobile military unit is your ability to feed them. He's got 5 loaves, 2 fish, and he feeds his military. This is something tremendous. Jesus has power. He has the power, if he wanted to rise up and to march down to Jerusalem, the capital, right then with his 5,000 and sort things out and set things right, to say that God has come back and has taken control, and God will now run things from the top of the pyramid, as it were. But he doesn't do that. He teaches them, he feeds them, and he lets them go. And what I think we're supposed to see is that there's a different way of participating in the fight against the true enemy than with violence. I think that's one of the things we're supposed to get here. So after all of those scenes, scene after scene after scene, we see Jesus is doing the work of Yahweh in amongst God's people. We end with another scene on the boat where he walks on the water. So after all of those depictions of Jesus as king, as Yahweh, hey, the disciples are gonna get it now. They're gonna track. And they thought Jesus was a ghost, and they were terrified, and they were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves. So there's a weird throw-in line. What do the loaves have anything to do with this scene on the boat? Well, they didn't understand what Jesus was doing at the feeding of the 5,000. They didn't understand that Jesus was feeding God's people the way that God does. They didn't understand that Jesus was God. He is a ghost. That is chapters 5 and 6. And so we move on next time with chapters 7 and 8 with, will the disciples understand what is happening in front of them? That's what we'll talk about next time.